Good morning.
Morning.
Friends, visitors from India, welcome. So, continuing our theme for this year of Chan Buddhism, I would like to talk today about the 12th century Chan master Hongzhi, whose full name is Hongzhi Zhengzhui. Chinese speakers, please forgive my pronunciation. And I'm interested in him because of his connection with a more contemporary Chan teacher, Venerable Xianyi, from our own century, and the teaching of silent illumination meditation, which Master Xianyi wrote quite a lot about and taught, and which comes to us also by way of Eihei Dogen, the founder of Soto Zen in Japan, where silent illumination meditation is known by the name of shikantaza, or just sitting, or objectless meditation. So that's the kind of tangle of interests that led me to Venerable Hongzhi. So while I'll give some details about Hongzhi's life and career as a teacher, I mainly want to put him in the context of the evolution of a certain tradition in Chan or Zen Buddhism, as well as share with you some of his practice instructions and his poetry. He was a very poetic teacher and writer. And the main source for my talk is a book titled Cultivating the Empty Field, The Silent Illumination of Zen Master Hongzhi, which was translated by Dan Layton and Yi Wu. Master Hongzhi was part of the Soto school, which is called Cao Dong in Chinese. And last week, Kathy, in her very nice talk, explained that the term Cao Dong is named after Dongshan, who is her principal character last week, combined with the name Cao Chi, the place where the sixth patriarch Huineng taught. And the Japanese transformed Cao Dong into Soto in their language, which is much easier for English speakers to pronounce, so I will use the term Soto. Hongzhi Zhengzhui lived between 1091 and 1157. He was born in the present-day Shaanxi province, and his family name was Li. Hongzhi means vast wisdom, and it was a name given to him by the emperor after Hongzhi's death. During his life, he would have been called Zhengzhui, and later Tiantong Zhengzhui. Zhengzhui was his monk ordination name, and Tiantong was the mountain where his temple stood. As a child, Hongzhi was very intelligent, learned many characters by a very young age, and by age 11, he left home to become a monk. At 18, he went to study with the Soto Zen teacher or master Kumu Facheng. And Kumu's style of practice involved sitting meditation so still that his body was said to resemble a block of dry wood. So he was known as Dry Wood Complete Dharma. And Hongzhi emulated this practice of immobile sitting throughout his life, so that this posture of cross-legged sitting in the lotus position was the background for all of his meditation instruction. After studying with various teachers, by 1129, Hongzhi was invited to teach at a monastery called Jinde, or Bright Virtue, on Mount Tiantong in Ming Province. When he arrived, the monastery was very small and had fallen into disrepair. But under Hongzhi's supervision, the temple was reconstructed and eventually could accommodate 1,200 monks. Hongzhi seems to have been a very calm and equanimous leader during the expansion of this monastery, much like our own master Jiru, I think. His Japanese Soto successor Dogen relates a story about a time when Hongzhi's monastery had provisions for only 1,000 monks, but an extra 500 or 600 showed up to hear him teach. An officer, senior monk of the temple, begged Hongzhi to send away the extra monks. But Hongzhi replied, "Each of them has his own mouth. It is not your concern. Do not worry about it." Dogen commends Hongzhi's faith in sincere practice as the main point. Hongzhi was also known to donate food to nearby villagers who were sometimes threatened by famine and other hard times. And he himself took no food after noon, although this was no longer customary at that time in Chan temples. So, from his arrival in 1129, Hongzhi remained on Mount Tiantong, refusing all invitations to leave, until, in the autumn of 1157, Hongzhi traveled down the mountain for the first time in nearly 30 years. He visited various patrons of his temple to say goodbye and thank them for their support. He returned to the temple on November 10th, and the next morning went to the Dharma Hall, where he gave a farewell talk to his monks. He then wrote a letter to his colleague and sometime critic, the Chan teacher Dahui Zonggao, asking him to take charge of the temple. Then he wrote a final poem and passed away in formal meditation posture. It is said that his body remained fresh in its coffin for 7 days, and 6 months later, the emperor, Gaozong, gave him the posthumous name Hongzhi Chanshi, Chan Master, Vast Wisdom. So I'd like to talk a little bit now about the practice of silent illumination, or shikantaza. Hongzhi's practice of silent illumination includes an implicit devotional element made up of reverence, which he expresses through his great appreciation of nature, and gratitude, expressed in his respect for the lineage of teachers who've transmitted the practice. There's a theme in Hongzhi's practice instructions that consists of the relationship between realization of the ultimate on one hand and functioning in the phenomenal world on the other. And he plays with this theme through poetic nature metaphors and by encouraging and exhorting his listeners, and frequently describes the integration of the universal and the particular. So here's an example. He writes, "Where emptiness is empty, it contains all of existence. Where existence exists, it joins the single emptiness. The merging of sameness and difference becomes the entire creation's mother. This realm manifests the energy of the many thousands of beings." So you see that he's playing with or expressing the dualities of emptiness and existence, sameness and difference, which together give rise to the many thousands of beings. Other metaphors for the duality of ultimate and particular and their interplay are darkness, representing the universal, and light, the light that differentiates phenomena. They are also sometimes called real and apparent, noumenal and phenomenal, true and partial, upright and inclined, straight and bent, equal and diverse, or empty and formed. The duality has also been expressed in terms of relationship between host and guest, lord and vassal, black and white, subject and object, and yang and yin. The goal of Hongzhi's practice is the full integration of deep, experiential awareness of the ultimate source with our particular functioning amid worldly phenomena, which we can call being in the world, but not of it. There's a teaching instruction in the Soto tradition that says, turn around the light to shine within, then just return. It describes a kind of oscillation or back and forth between realizing the ultimate, as in meditation, and one's worldly functioning in the phenomenal world, as in the Bodhisattva path. And this is a pattern that Hongzhi demonstrates throughout his practice instructions. Hongzhi also repeatedly encourages his students to embody the teachings with independence, awakening fully on their own. Because Soto Zen holds that nobody can experience the truth for another. And this led to the teaching style of not giving explicit directions, leading students to realize personally their own inmost nature. I mentioned earlier that there was a critic, a sometime critic, of Venerable Hongzhi's teachings, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that. In the history of Chan, or Zen, Hongzhi has been noteworthy for an alleged conflict or dispute with the prominent Rinzai teacher, Dahui Zonggao. Rinzai would be the other primary school of Zen. Dahui criticized silent illumination meditation as leading to excessive quietism and neglect of enlightenment. Dahui and Rinzai practice emphasized a technique which was and is very different from silent illumination in many ways. And this is the practice that has come to be known as koan, or koman, introspection, leading to a dramatic breakthrough experience of awakening. Dahui also felt that koman practice worked more effectively with lay practitioners and with the non-literary social group that made up most of his students, while Hongzhi was a very literary teacher and appealed to a more literary group of practitioners. Dahui criticized silent illumination's advocates for, in his words, just teaching people to stop and rest and play dead, and that they sit wordlessly with eyes shut beneath the black mountain and don't seek subtle, wondrous enlightenment. He claimed that silent illumination produces addiction to calmness by overemphasizing concentration at the expense of insight. However, Hongzhi's teaching and his practice instructions takes care to balance these two qualities. He has a poem, Guidepost of Silent Illumination, in which he clearly stresses the indispensability and interdependence of both serenity, or calmness, and illumination, or insight. He writes, if illumination neglects serenity, then aggressiveness appears. If serenity neglects illumination, murkiness leads to wasted dharma, or useless teaching. Hongzhi's teaching may have been misapplied by some of his followers, but in its original form, it encourages active functioning in the everyday phenomenal world. As we saw earlier in the theme of balance or harmony between experiencing the ultimate and the particular, the purpose of spiritual practice is to realize both wisdom's illuminating insight and its appropriate functioning in the ordinary world of beings. This takes the form of the Bodhisattva vow and path. For Hongzhi, the whole purpose of practice is, in his words, to graciously share yourself with the 100 grass tips in the busy marketplace. Grass tips meaning myriad beings. Despite their differences in approach, Dahui and Hongzhi were actually friends who cooperated as teaching colleagues and who sent students to each other. And as I previously mentioned, at the end of his life, it was Dahui whom Hongzhi asked to take charge of his temple. Even today, Soto and Rinzai teachers have a tradition of cooperating in their work with students. Eihei Dogen, founder of the Soto school in Japan, also followed the Rinzai tradition in Japan before finding his Soto master in China. Later on, Dogen refused even to identify with such a thing as a Zen school, much less Soto or Rinzai. He wasn't interested at all in any of those distinctions. And I think it's also significant that Venerable Master Xianyi, our contemporary teacher, that his student and translator, Guogu, who has taught and given retreats here at Maba, he teaches both Shikantaza and Kunan, or koan practice. So, turning now to Hongzhi's relation to Master Dogen. Hongzhi's influence since his lifetime is not primarily through a direct lineage of successors, but in the way he gave rise to the fundamental attitudes of Zen. And his influence is most apparent in the way his teachings were developed by the Japanese Soto school, derived from Dogen, and how in recent decades these teachings have spread to the West, leading to our presence right here. In this tradition, Hongzhi is revered as a major forerunner, even though the Japanese Soto school descends not directly from him, but from his Dharma brother Dogen. It's Dogen who called Hongzhi's silent illumination meditation Shikantaza, or just sitting. As I mentioned before, it's an objectless and non-dualistic meditation that does not involve any stages or striving after a goal or achievement. And so it's an activity that's quite radically different from our usual daily activity, which grasps and seeks for results in everything we do. Hongzhi encourages this practice by saying, and I quote, "Stay with that, just as that. Stay with this, just as this." And Dogen expresses the same understanding when he urges practitioners to have no design on becoming a Buddha, since this meditation is already the Dharma gate of repose and bliss, the practice realization of totally culminated enlightenment. End quote. The unity of practice and enlightenment is central to Dogen's teaching. And I'd like to say a bit more about this using another source. I have been enjoying very much an online course that I've been involved in for a few weeks on the Heart Sutra. And the course is being taught by Joan Halifax Roshi and the contemporary Zen teacher, artist, and translator, Kazuaki Tanahashi. Kaz, as he is known, says in his book on the Heart Sutra, quote, "For Dogen, nirvana is an experience of shunyata, zeroness or boundlessness. Dogen says, on the great road of Buddha ancestors, there is always unsurpassable practice, continuous and sustained. It forms the circle of the way and is never cut off. Between aspiration, practice, enlightenment, and nirvana, there is not a moment's gap. Continuous practice is the circle of the way." That's the end of Dogen's quote. Kaz continues, Thus, each moment of our practice encompasses these four aspects of experience: aspiration for enlightenment, practice, enlightenment, and nirvana. I call it a microcircle. Dogen further suggests, accordingly, by the continuous practice of all Buddhas and ancestors, your practice is actualized and your great road opens up. By your continuous practice, the continuous practice of all Buddhas is actualized and the great road of all Buddhas opens up. Your continuous practice creates the circle of the way. End of Dogen's quote. And Kaz says again, this is a macro circle. We do not practice meditation alone. We practice together with all the awakened ones everywhere in the past, present, and future. Indeed, do we not meditate together with all the awakened ones and their helpers throughout space? Do we not identify ourselves with the great realization of wisdom beyond wisdom in the past, present, and future? End quote. He uses the phrase wisdom beyond wisdom, which is Kaz's new translation of the phrase prajnaparamita. One other point that Len Dayton, the translator of my source, that he makes about Hongzhi's teaching is that it foretells such modern movements as deep ecology, with its sense of identity, of self and ecosystem. An example is this passage. The white clouds are fascinated with the green mountain's foundation. The bright moon cherishes being carried along with the flowing water. The clouds part and the mountain appears. The moon sets and the water is cool. Hongzhi does not simply use clouds and mountains as metaphors for awakened activity. Rather, he is saying that the clouds actually are us, and the mountains are us, and the fascination is us. We are the flowing water. We are the bright moon. I'd like to spend the last few minutes sharing some examples of Hongzhi's practice instructions, particularly those that utilize symbolism and references to older Chan traditions. Bear in mind that Hongzhi wants in these practice instructions to describe and evoke the actual experience of enlightened awareness. Here's the first example, quote, "If you accord everywhere with thorough clarity and cut off sharp corners without dependence on doctrines, like the white bull or wildcat, you can be called a complete person." End quote. So what is this white bull or wildcat? This imagery refers to Dongshan's Song of the Precious Mirror Samadhi, which states, "For the benefit of those with inferior ability, there is a jeweled footrest and brocade robes. For the benefit of those capable of wonder, a wild cat or white ox." Dongshan's use of this imagery refers back further to a saying of one of his early teachers who said, "The Buddhas of past, present, and future do not know it is. Cats and cows know it is." The teacher is referring to the straightforward, unself-conscious awareness and activity of cats and cows compared to those of humans. And then too, the ox was later used in Zen in various versions of the ox herding pictures. Some of you may be familiar with that teaching tool, which depicts stages of spiritual development. And in some versions, the ox progresses from black to white, representing the purification process. Here's another example. of a practice instruction from one called "The Ground That Sages Cannot Transmit." The mind does not attach to things, and your footsteps are not visible on the road. Then you are called to continue the family business. Family business is an image for perpetuating and transmitting a teaching tradition or lineage. But in a broader sense, all those who take refuge in Buddha Dharma are called children of Buddha. And so to carry on the family business means to fulfill one's vow, to achieve enlightenment, and in Mahayana, by liberating all beings together with oneself. Here's another example from an instruction titled, "With Total Trust, Roam and Play in Samadhi." For those new to this, samadhi means meditative concentration. Hongzhi writes, "People with the bottom of the bucket fallen out immediately find total trust." The bottom of the bucket falling out is a Zen image for the experience of one's preconceptions and fixed worldviews suddenly and completely evaporating. And it's an experience that totally transforms a person's attitudes, even though his or her ingrained habits may not be completely purified and may continue to influence a person's activity in the world. So we're told this experience of the bottom of the bucket falling out leads us to find total trust. Hongzhi then continues, "So we are told simply to realize mutual response and explore mutual response, then turn around and enter the world, roam and play in samadhi." I'll conclude with one more instruction called "Drop off your skin, accept your function," which I think is very beautiful and expressive of enlightened practice. It begins, "In daytime the sun, at night the moon, each in turn does not blind the other. This is how a patch-robed monk steadily practices, naturally without edges or seams. To gain such steadiness, you must completely withdraw from the invisible pounding and weaving of your ingrained ideas. If you want to be rid of this invisible turmoil, you must just sit through it and let go of everything. Attain fulfillment and illuminate thoroughly, light and shadow altogether forgotten." Here, light and shadow again refer to our dualistic conceptions. The instruction continues, "Drop off your own skin, and the sense dusts will be fully purified, the eye readily discerning the brightness. Accept your function and be wholly satisfied. In the entire place you are not restricted. The whole time you still mutually respond. Right in light there is darkness. Right in darkness there is light. A solitary boat carries the moon. At night it lodges amid the reed flowers, gently swaying in total brilliance." Well, I hope you've enjoyed these brief samples of Hongzhi's teaching instructions, and that this talk helps clarify and illuminate more of the teachings and traditions of Chan Buddhism. So may all beings be safe and happy, and may they realize wisdom beyond wisdom.